This week's tale of the Old Trapper is titled Old Trapper and the Christmas Visitors by Shawn, Henninger. The old trapper sat in front of the fireplace with a fresh cup of homemade eggnog. The cold, snowy tundra outside was an afterthought as the fire kept him warm. Hanging above the fireplace was one of the old trapper's socks, waiting for a visitor to come down the chimney and fill it with goodies. The old trapper loved this time of year, and Christmas was tomorrow, which was his favorite day. As a child, the old trapper would wake up and race to the tree his father and he had cut down hoping for presents. Now, as he was older, Christmas was a time he typically spent by himself. Each year, he had cut down a new Christmas tree and decorated it with popcorn on strings and homemade ornaments, always placing the star his mother made at the top. This year, however, the old trapper had a feeling he should get a bigger tree and place 3 presents underneath it. Now, the old trapper knew that it had been years since he had a visitor on Christmas Eve, but he thought he should be prepared. The fire crackled as the old trapper placed another log on the fire and poured himself the last of the eggnog. The thought popped up in the old trapper's mind that maybe he should make more. But for who? Just then a knock came on the door and startled the old trapper. Who on earth could be coming at this time of night? The old trapper walked to the door and peeked out the window. Standing there was an older woman he had never seen before. She was bundled up, and as she spoke, the old trapper could see her breath in the air. "Please, if anyone is home, could I stand by the fire for a moment? It's rather cold out, and I just need to rest, and then I'll be on my way." The old trapper opened the door and welcomed the old woman into his home. He sat her by the fire and wrapped her in one of his blankets. As she sat down, he could see her smile return as the fire warmed her and her soul. The old trapper made more of his famous eggnog and brought her a fresh cup. "This is the most wonderful eggnog I've ever tasted. I thank you for letting me sit by your fire for a moment." The old trapper looked upon the woman, and she wore shoes that looked tattered, but noticed she had no socks. Old trapper reached under the tree and pulled one of the 3 presents. He gave it to the old woman, who smiled with glee. "It's been ages since I've received a present on Christmas Eve," she explained. As she opened the present, there was a new pair of wool socks the old trapper had sewn. The old woman hugged the old trapper and put the socks on. After spending more time with the old trapper, the old woman said her goodbyes and went on her way. The old trapper looked down at the remaining presents under his tree. There was once 3, now only 2. The old trapper reached into his cupboard and pulled out some fresh rolls he had baked earlier that day. The rolls were a family recipe passed down from generations that were a special treat during this time of year. As he walked back towards the fire, he heard a horse stopping just out front of his cabin. The old trapper walked outside and noticed a horseman looking down at his horse's hoof. The old trapper bundled up with his warmest deerskin jacket and met the man out in the cold winter air. The man greeted the old trapper. "I apologize for bothering you on this Christmas Eve, but my horse's shoe fell off and she's in need of some rest. I'm so far from town, but if I could just get a place for my horse to rest, I'll be on my way as soon as I can." The old trapper led the horse to his stable, where it stood next to his mule and chickens that had roosted there for the evening. As the horseman and the old trapper went into the cabin, the old trapper offered him some of his homemade rolls. After a bit, the horseman exclaimed, "These taste almost exactly like the rolls my wife made on Christmas Eve. I was riding all through the night to be home by Christmas to see her and the children." The old trapper looked towards the tree and grabbed one of the 2 remaining presents. Handing the horseman the present, he opened it and found a new horseshoe that was just the right size for his horse. "Oh, thank you! Once my horse is rested, I can put this horseshoe on and be on my way. I'll have just enough time to make it home before the children wake up on Christmas Day." After the horseman had warmed by the fire and filled his belly with rolls and eggnog, the old trapper went to the stable and helped him shoe his horse and waved as the horseman went on his way back to his family. The old trapper went back inside and closed the door. 2 visitors on Christmas Eve was a Christmas wish he didn't even think to make. Thinking back on his family, he remembered he had the ingredients for 1 cup of hot chocolate. After warming the milk and mixing the chocolate, he lifted the cup as he heard tears from outside. He went to the door once more, and near the stable he saw a small child sitting and crying. The old trapper quickly rushed out the door and brought the scared child back in the cabin. Again, just like the 2 visitors before the child, the old trapper provided warmth, food, and in this instance, his last cup of hot chocolate. The child told the old trapper, "My family was traveling and resting for the night. I found myself chasing after a deer, thinking it must be one of Santa's reindeer. I was all turned around and lost until I found your stable where I sat and cried." The old trapper knew this child's family must be worried, especially on Christmas Eve. The old trapper told the child that she could rest here for the night, and in the morning he would help her find her family. The child lay near the fire, and as the old trapper stood, he noticed she was missing something. The old trapper grabbed the last present under the tree and handed it to the little girl. She opened it quickly, excited to get an early gift, and inside was a stuffed fox that the old trapper had made himself. The child was ecstatic and cuddled the fox as she fell asleep. The old trapper went to his bed and laid his head on the pillow. As the old trapper began to drift off, he swore he heard the faint sound of sleigh bells. As the morning sun rose, the old trapper rose from bed and made some breakfast for the child. They both made their way to the stable, where they took out the old trapper's mule and headed toward where the girl said her family was. After a short ride, the old trapper noticed smoke from a fire and was able to find the girl's family. They were all thankful she was safe and thanked the old trapper for helping bring their child home. As the old trapper began his ride back to the cabin, he saw the girl excitedly showing off her new fox. The old trapper walked in the door of his cabin and stoked the fire that was starting to die out. The old trapper hadn't had a visitor on Christmas Eve in so long, and this year he had 3. The joy he felt from giving out gifts and helping had warmed his soul as much as the fire had warmed his body. As the old trapper took a seat, he looked up at the stocking hung by the fire. Every year he hung the stocking, and every year it remained empty. But the old trapper noticed that the stocking looked fuller than normal. When he went to the stocking, he picked it up, noticing the weight. The old trapper smiled to himself as he swore once more he had heard the faint sounds of sleigh bells. From the old trapper and everyone at Tales of the Old Trapper, we wish you a very Merry Christmas. The end. Thank you for listening to another episode of Tales of the Old Trapper, written by Shawn Henninger. To support Tales of the Old Trapper, have your parents leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and follow Old Trapper Pod on Twitter. Be sure to share the Tales of the Old Trapper with others that would enjoy the adventure of the Old Trapper. Until next week, go out and create a tale of your own.